Sources say Cathay Pacific plans to lay off some 6,000 staff members. One locally acquired coronavirus infection linked to a Chim Sha Tsui cluster. And in Thailand, anti-government protests continue, and the authorities reportedly ask for action against certain information providers.
Good evening and welcome. According to sources, Cathay Pacific is planning to lay off about 6,000 staff members around the world, including some 5,000 here in Hong Kong.
And some of those who can keep their jobs would have to take a pay cut. The airline is expected to reach a decision this week at the earliest. Kana Chu reports.
Darker days are yet to come for Cathay Pacific as the city's flagship carrier will mull over in the next few days a series of cost-cutting methods for survival amid the pandemic. That involves letting go nearly 6,000 employees, more than half of them being aircrew members. With 90% of the Cathay employees being Hong Kong hires, the mass layoff is expected to wipe out roughly 17% of all staff. Those who manage to stay on would have to take salary cuts or no pay leaves. Baptist University economist Billy Mack says circumstances have made the redundancy inevitable, but Cathay should consider an alternate business model. He also noted the mass job cut is unlikely to boost the local unemployment rate, as it would involve just about 0.1% of the city's 3.5 million labor force. As the impact of COVID-19 continues to spread worldwide, the International Air Transport Association predicts the global demand for air travel is unlikely to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2024. Last month alone, only 47,061 people traveled on board Cathay Pacific and Cathay Dragon flights, with only 1,568 passengers per day. That's a 98% decrease compared with the same time last year. In the first 9 months of the year, passenger volume dropped 80% year-on-year. Passenger flight capacity also fell by 75% and is forecast to remain at just about 10% of pre-crisis levels for the remaining months of the year. Next year, passenger flight capacity may bounce back to about a quarter in the first 6 months. A further recovery can follow in the second half of the year if a vaccine becomes widely available next summer. Still, a rebound will not exceed 50% for the whole of next year. And the situation is not looking any better for freight transport. Despite an increase in demand, Cathay carried only some 109,000 tons of cargo and mail in September. That's 36.6% less year-on-year. Kana Chu, TVB News.
15 more COVID-19 cases were reported in the city today. Among the cases, there is one locally acquired infection, which is linked to a cluster of infections in Chim Sha Tsui.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam, meanwhile, said again that the government will roll out a health code to facilitate cross-border travels as soon as possible. Pinky Wong reports.
The locally infected patient is a 21-year-old woman. She's a close contact of a patient in the coronavirus cluster at the Royal Garden Hotel in Tsim Sha Tsui East. The woman was sent to hospital after testing positive at the quarantine center. Involved in the 14 imported cases are arrivals from India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Russia, and the United States. Some of them are aircrew members and foreign domestic helpers. Local COVID-19 cases have been resurfacing in recent weeks, some with unknown source of infection. During interviews with newspapers, Chief Executive Carrie Lam admitted it would be challenging for Hong Kong to have no new local infection for 14 consecutive days. She said the government is trying to roll out a health code to facilitate travels across the border with the mainland. Lam noted that when the health code is adopted, there would still be restrictions like setting a quota to limit the number of people crossing the border. She added some legal work has yet to be completed, including separating mainland areas into two risk categories with different quarantine requirements. Secretary for Food and Health Sophia Chan will meet with representatives of the medical sector tonight to collect opinions about mandatory testing for certain patients seeking treatment at private clinics. President of the Hong Kong Medical Association, Gabriel Choi, said he does not prefer mandatory testing as that would involve a lot of legal responsibilities. Choi said mandatory testing will only be effective in eliminating the coronavirus in the city if all borders are shut during the process. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Public hospital workers who went on strike earlier this year over the government's handling of the coronavirus epidemic fear there may be repercussions for their actions.
As Haley Joe reports, a legal expert believes the hospital authority may have grounds to sack the employees.
Back in February, thousands of workers at public hospitals went on strike, demanding a complete border shutdown over the COVID-19 outbreak. Earlier this month, members of the Hospital Authority Employees Alliance received emails from the Human Resources Department. They were asked to clarify why they were absent from duty for several days in February. In response, the union's leadership put out a unified response. The union said the industrial action was legal under the trade union's ordinance, and the right to strike is protected by the Basic Law. Under the employment ordinance, employers are not entitled to dismiss employees because of their participation in a strike. However, a lawyer specializing in commercial law says the hospital authority may have grounds for dismissal.
It seems that the allegedly lawful strike is not that lawful at all, because they take place within the office hours and they don't have the permission from the employer. Also, the purpose of organizing the strike seems quite far away from the legitimate purpose as protected under the trade union's ordinance.
However, another lawyer suggests the issue is not so straightforward. He says it's unlikely employers will allow their staff to strike during working hours.
If this case is taken to the court, a constitutional issue may arise as to whether Section 21B protects the right to strike at all.
So far, no workers have been fired for taking part in the strike. Haley Joe, TVB News.
Worldwide coronavirus cases have now surpassed 40 million. Experts, however, believe the true case and death tallies could be much higher. Strict lockdown measures are now being reimposed globally. New restrictions have not been universally popular in Europe, a region that has recently seen a sharp spike in new COVID cases. In the Czech Republic, police used tear gas and water cannons on Sunday to disperse hundreds of violent protesters. This after a rally against the nation's lockdown restrictions got underway in the capital, Prague. At least 20 people were reportedly injured in the clashes. Similar demonstrations erupting in neighboring Slovakia on Saturday. Elsewhere in Europe, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has announced further restrictions on public life. Mayors in the country can now close public squares and other gathering places after 9 p.m. Restaurants and bars must switch to table service only after 6 p.m., but can still close at midnight. Local festivals have also been banned. Confirmed infections in Italy doubled over the past week to more than 10,000 a day.
Thailand's Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha has said there are no plans to extend a state of emergency outside Bangkok. This despite the fact that student-led protests calling for him to resign are continuing to spread throughout the country. Police in Bangkok are also exploring new ways of clamping down on dissent. They have reportedly requested that action should be taken against information providers that distribute what they call distorted information. This means censorship measures legally mandated by Bangkok's state of emergency could now be enforced in a bid to restrict reporting on the protests. The Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand said it was deeply concerned by the censorship threat. Anti-government protests have intensified in Thailand over the past week. The movement calling for political and monarchical reform initially broke out in March, but was hampered by the pandemic.
On his maiden foreign trip, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has made a diplomatic breakthrough with Vietnam. A basic agreement has been drafted between Tokyo and Hanoi that aims to increase defense and security cooperation. In talks in Hanoi today, Suga and Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc set out the deal. It will allow Japan to export defense equipment and technology to Vietnam. Suga called the agreement a major step in boosting bilateral defense cooperation. Japan already has defense equipment transfer deals with the United States, Britain, the Philippines, and Malaysia. The two leaders also pledged to increase cooperation in areas such as infrastructure development, energy production, and agricultural trade. Japan has been keen to strengthen diplomatic ties throughout the Asia-Pacific region in a bid to counteract what they perceive to be a threat from China.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden ramped up their offensives yesterday ahead of a presidential election that's just over 2 weeks away.
With a record 28 million Americans having already cast ballots, the two contenders are targeting their campaigns in key states they're trying to flip. Trump began Sunday in Nevada with a rare visit to church. The state was once considered a battleground, but hasn't swung for a Republican presidential contender since 2004.
The Lord said to me, I am going to give your president a second win.
Trump visited the same church as a candidate in 2016. He has drawn strong support from white evangelical leaders and frequently hosts groups of pastors at the White House. At a rally later in Carson City, Trump had familiar warnings for thousands of supporters about the dangers of a Biden election win.
If you vote for Biden, he will surrender your jobs to China. He will surrender your future to the virus. He's going to lock down. This guy wants to lock down. He'll listen to the scientists. If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression.
Coronavirus cases in Nevada are on the rise, with more than 1,000 new infections reported on Saturday. Across the country, Joe Biden visited another key battleground state where 20% of the state's registered voters have already cast ballots. Speaking at a drive-in rally, Biden told supporters that North Carolina is crucial to his chance of victory.
I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I will govern as an American president. No red states, no blue states, just the United States.
Despite the honks of approval, a Democratic presidential candidate hasn't won North Carolina since Barack Obama in 2008. While both candidates try to make inroads in states that could help secure a path to victory, the dynamics of the race remain remarkably stable. Still, Biden enjoys a significant advantage in national polls while carrying a smaller edge in battleground surveys. Still ahead in tonight's news, France set to expel more than 200 suspected extremists following last week's beheading of a teacher near Paris. In Bolivia, an aide to former leftist leader Evo Morales claims victory in presidential election. And a suspended jail sentence for the Central and Western District Council chairperson for doxing a police officer. Welcome back to TVB News. French Prime Minister Jean Castex joined demonstrators on Sunday who rallied together across the country in a tribute to a history teacher who was beheaded near Paris last Friday.
France's government is now preparing to launch further clampdowns on radical Islamists. Daniel Raoul has more on this story.
On Sunday, French Prime Minister Jean Castex was among those who gathered at Paris's Place de la République in a display of solidarity following the recent murder of teacher Samuel Paty. The 47-year-old educator was beheaded on Friday in the Paris suburb of Conflans-Sainte-Honorine. This after he became a target for radicals due to his classes discussing freedom of speech. The classes were said to have incorporated caricatures of religious figures, including Islam's prophet Muhammad. Paty's killer, an 18-year-old Chechen refugee, was subsequently shot dead by police. US President Donald Trump expressed his condolences from a rally in Wisconsin, as demonstrators also gathered in other major cities in France, including Lyon, Strasbourg, Marseille, and Bordeaux. Some held placards reading, "I am Samuel," that echoed the I Am Charlie rallying cry after the 2015 attack on the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo was targeted by extremists for publishing caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. French anti-terrorism prosecutors have now opened an investigation into the murder. 11 people have so far been detained in the wake of the killing. At least 4 of those in custody are reported to be family members of the attacker. The beheading has sparked a rebuke from moderate French Muslims, as well as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The group condemned the killing, as well as all forms of extremism, radicalization and terrorism for any reason or motive. French President Emmanuel Macron, however, remains under pressure to clamp down on Islamic extremism amid scrutiny from right-wing groups. France's Interior Ministry is now set to expel 231 suspected extremists from the country. Daniel Rao, TVB News.
Exit polls in Bolivia have declared the hand-picked candidate of former leader Evo Morales the winner of a rerun of last year's election. Speaking from his party's headquarters, Luis Arce affirmed his victory and said that the election was a very important step forward. Official results are still trickling in, but a private quick count of sampled polling stations favored Arce by a wide margin over his conservative rival, former President Carlos Mesa. Arce is a former economy minister under Morales. Sunday's poll is regarded as a test of democracy in the Andean nation after last year's election was annulled over allegations of vote rigging. Violent protests forced leftist leader Morales to quit and flee the country after almost 14 years in power. Back here at home, the chairwoman of the Central and Western District Council has been given a suspended jail sentence at the High Court for doxing a police officer. Chung Lai King was accused of posting the officer's personal data, including his name, on her social media page in March this year. The officer allegedly shot an Indonesian woman in the eye during a protest last November. The post violated an injunction issued by the High Court last year, which bans the doxing of police. Chung had earlier pleaded guilty to contempt of court. She told the court that she was not aware of the injunction when she forwarded the policeman's information through her social media account. She was sentenced today to 28 days in jail, suspended for a year.
Thanks for joining us. Money Matters is up afterwards.
Bye for now.